yours. Welcome to EMS at Sea Level. Today's guest is Ross Berntson, President and COO of Indium Corporation. Before we get started, Ross, can you give me a brief introduction to yourself and to Indium Corporation for anybody that's unaware?
Absolutely, Phil. Thank you for having me today. So Indium Corporation is a long-term supplier of materials to the electronics industry. We're family-owned. We're positioned throughout the world supporting electronics manufacturers everywhere you can imagine with the full range of solder materials as well as inorganic compounds. I've been with Indium since 1996, so I'm a long-term Indium employee and really have drunk the Kool-Aid and love the work we do here. And at Indium, we believe material science changes the world. And I think as we talk today, hopefully I'll give you some examples of how that's happened in the last couple of years and as we've even gone into this COVID crisis.
Okay, and it's for me, it's really interesting to talk to someone in the consumables market because I see you as a real weather-vane for what's going on in the industry. So, kind of talk me through where you've been on this journey from February onwards. What's your experience been like? What are the challenges, and how have you helped your customers mitigate those?
Well, if you know and study supply chain management, almost everyone does the beer game or understands the bullwhip effect or something like that. And certainly we've experienced that. As China extended their New Year celebration a couple more weeks and kept everyone home, we certainly felt China just shrink. But meanwhile, while that was happening, Europe and the US were doing okay. We were actually having a great start to the year. And then all of a sudden, as China maybe started recovering or stabilizing, Southeast Asia went down real quick. And then, but the U.S. and Europe stayed strong. And then all of a sudden, Southeast Asia started coming back really fast, actually, with the semiconductor industry has had quite a boom.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, the Europe and U.S., especially with the automotive exposure, just crashed down. So but now China is booming again. So it's just all over the place. And man, we feel like we're whipped around as a supplier deep in the supply chain, and it's hard to stay on your toes. We've restructured our factories to accommodate all the COVID response we've had to do. So that's created a challenge to response.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, for me, it's this perfect storm. It's this triple play of supply chain disruption in Asia, spreading around the world, then demand disruption due to the fact that people are staying home and there's an economic impact. And also shift in demand to more medical products, and then the workplace challenges as well to get everybody, located within social distancing and all that stuff as well. So it's been very, very complex. Specifically related to COVID-19, what has the company been involved in there? And a lot of your customers are definitely essential players. So I guess there's a demand to support them in specific ways.
Yeah, and that is true. As an essential manufacturer of essential materials, we've been busy through this whole crisis, and in some cases extremely busy, just trying to keep up. It's a great responsibility, and it's a wonderful privilege to be able to stay open and support ventilator manufacturers, for example, with maybe an expedited shipment of flux cord wire, or getting solder paste out to some new trial for a new medical test equipment that might be being made in Malaysia. Getting that kind of response is really exciting and thrilling for the employees because it feels like you're making a big difference in helping the overall world respond to this crisis. But even when you think about the supply chain electronics industry, if you support a semiconductor device that's made, let's say, in the Philippines or maybe Taiwan, that may very well enable the power device or the power supply of some medical and analytic tool, or maybe even the automotive electronics that end up in an ambulance. Or these supply chains are so complicated that it's a real sense of responsibility to keep the product flowing. But when you now have shifts, so we staggered all of our shifts, so we de-densified our first shift. And then we got caught up, like in Singapore, with some of our laborers that were in Malaysia unable to get to our factory in Singapore. Right. So we've had to operate on reduced staff and still keep the output high. We certainly had that challenge with some of our team in China, where people had toured outside the region and couldn't get back right away. So those are real challenges. And then here locally in New York as a state has been a hot spot. Where we are located, it hasn't been too bad, but certainly we've had the challenges of people either needing to stay out because of their own personal health concerns, or actually being exposed or being at risk of exposure to COVID has kept our workforce maybe down a little bit. So all of that has created a lot of challenges for our factory workers and everyone trying to manage all that demand coming through the factory.
Yeah, and what about the sudden spikes? I mean, has there been a big challenge in terms of where you've got stock and where you've needed stock and where you've had to ramp or slow production in different geographies?
Absolutely. So we've had to be pretty dynamic in terms of moving staff. So in the upstate New York area, we have 5 factories. So we've been able to move people from one site to another where demand has shifted, or from one work cell to another where demand has shifted. So that's been a really powerful ability to have that here. Similarly, when China wasn't able to get all their output out, they were able to be backed up by our other sites. And now that Singapore was constrained, they were backed up by our other sites, in China and the US. And then we also pre-positioned inventory in a lot of strategic locations to make sure we were able to respond. So we did a lot of things to make sure that our supply chain, our customers really didn't see any hiccups for most of our materials, even though we had to endure some real spikes in demand. And I give a lot of credit to our talent throughout the organization that they've been able to respond in that way.
Yeah, and it's been one of those periods that's been a lot about leadership, but even more about team, hasn't it? It's been about how the teams responded and how the industry has responded. One of the things that I've been very impressed to see is the level of collaboration and the commitment companies are making to their customers and to each other. You know, you see press releases with one or two of the biggest EMS companies in the world helping a ventilator company out, and you wouldn't normally see the names of those companies in the same press release as each other. So collaboration's been huge.
Yeah, we've even seen that in our local area. So that's an industry collaboration, which certainly we've seen and been a part of, and that's great. But here locally, you know, when we started seeing the COVID crisis, because we're an international player, we got to see it a little bit earlier because we had our China, Singapore, and Korean facilities all being exposed to COVID well before it arrived in New York. So the first case in New York was on March 1st. We were already starting to rally some of the local manufacturers in the central New York region on March 2nd to start thinking about how do we make sure we convey to the government here that we can operate safely, we can keep people safe and keep our factories running. And that was, it was really an important part of the whole story here in upstate New York, that we were able to create this cohort, this consortium of 16 manufacturers actually to start with. There was a beer manufacturer, a test and measurement manufacturer, a guy who does a print press manufacturer, you know, and then companies like Danfoss Semiconductor, who's right here in town. You know, so we had some in the industry, but mostly all different businesses, boiler manufacturers, and we all came together to say, here's how we're going to keep everything safe. So we created a manufacturer's pledge. That was a commitment to how we will operate, how we will keep our people safe. And then also we were able to convey that and ultimately ended up in the county executive offices, as well as our Governor Cuomo, who's been on TV a lot. I think it helped to influence him. And now I know that it also helped to influence Rhode Island's governor and spread throughout really all over the world. There's people using this pledge to help convey how they're committed to staying safe and keeping their factory rolling, while making sure everyone who enters that factory and participates in operation of that factory is doing so with the goal of zero on-site transmission.
Yeah, and I think that's, you know, that's really essential. We want to get everybody back to work as quickly as possible, but we certainly don't want to see a second spike or a second wave. We want to keep everybody safe. So when you look at this, you know, I kind of look at the initial response as being the urgent, and then we're moving into this phase of getting people back to work and recovery and everything that's important. And then this kind of long-term stage of taking what we've learned and shifting the industry forward. How do you see those phases for Indium?
Well, I think right now we are at this new normal right now. So we've kind of gone through the first stage of this whole crisis, and it feels strange to say it's normal to arrive at the office with a mask on and go get your temperature taken. And in our company, you have to get your temperature taken, wash your hands, and then you get a wristband to say, hey, I did everything I need to do to get into the building. And so we've been doing that. So but that all, as strange as that sounds, that all seems normal now. I think where we're going to start, we're starting to get a little bit challenging is when you have the need for that next level of innovation, that next level of creativity. How are we going to, those highly collaborative processes, how do we sustain those when we're not able to be on as many factory floors, we're not able to travel as readily, and we're not able to collaborate here inside the building, just with between our engineers and R&D people and marketing people and sales people to make sure that we're really driving innovation. So my biggest challenge right now, I think, is to keep driving innovation in the midst of a new norm where you're kind of in and out, you can be here and can't be here. And some companies have really seemed to have mastered this. I've done a lot of studying on remote collaboration and innovation without being co-located. And I would have to say the data is decidedly mixed on how well that works. So I'm looking forward to someone who has cracked that secret code. If you do, please call me, because I think it's something that we all need help with.
Yeah. Do you think part of that is digital transformation? Do you think part of that is having more agile, more computer-led, more software-led processes that give us perhaps a more robust solution in the future?
Well, I mean, so one of the challenges I always have with data is, and using, so if you think about it, AI can only process the data that is served. And there's a certain bias in what data is collected to be served to that group, right? And so I'm amazed at how many things theoretically should not work. Everyone believes they won't work. I'm told unequivocally, or I've been the person unequivocally telling someone else this won't work, and then they go try it and it works. And so, I mean, this is just the nature of material science sometimes. It's very hard to be perfectly predictive of how materials will behave under certain circumstances. I think although the promise of nanomaterials maybe has never really been fulfilled in our industry, the reality is we couldn't predict how all those nanomaterials would behave before we actually worked with them. If we had created an AI model of what's going to happen when we go nano with materials, I don't think it would have told us a whole lot because it didn't have the inputs. It didn't have any empirical data. So that ability to actually do hands-on testing still is there. But certainly when you're in a refinement mode or you're within an optimization mode, there's an old adage that, anything that's more than a 3-part composition is almost impossible to optimize for a given feedback because it's so complex. And with AI, I think we're going to be able to push that a little bit further in terms of how much we can optimize around multi-part complex systems. And I think that's where it gets really big. And I think just one quick example of that is just the reflow process. How much paste, what type of paste, what are the metallizations, what's the ramp temperature, what's the peak temperature, what's the atmosphere, how many surface metallizations do you have on the components, what's your real response variable, what's your goal? You just think about the complexity of that question. It's massive. And so optimizing across a large board, how to make sure everything performs as well as possible is quite challenging. And now you do that and you bring it to an SIP or heterogeneous integration where now you have flip chip on board, you got wire bonding, you got all these really small, holy cow, and that's where I think there could be some real benefit as models progress to really optimize their production performance around those attributes.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you say about things like machine learning and AI, and I've read a couple of pieces in the last, even this weekend, about AI struggling and people having to go back and fix it because it's now in this unpredictable state. So, when things kind of come at AI from left field, it can be a little bit freaked out by it. So I think some challenges there with data, and there's just so much data, so you've got to be protected from that complexity as well. So shifting to some of the maybe lighter stuff in the business, you've got a whole team of salespeople, of engineers, all working from home. How are you keeping them sane? How are you keeping them as cohesive as possible?
Yeah, so we've adopted WebEx Teams. There's many of these platforms out there, and there's a work from home warriors team, and they're sharing stories, and because their challenges are quite different than if you think about it. There's the challenge of working from home is its own set of weirdness versus the challenge of showing up at work in the midst of this crisis and having to work next to someone who doesn't live in your home. both have their own challenges. So trying to keep both those groups a little connected, yes, but also as independent groups operating.
Yeah.
And so the work from home warriors are really led by our sales team, who've always been work from home, right? And they're just kind of going stir crazy because they can't travel, but we're making the most of it. So the big things we're doing right now is to connect with our customers, especially. We have our Insider series, which is a series of webcasts we've been doing, which have been really well attended and well received. And actually, we've gotten a whole bunch of new ideas from participants on other webcasts they would like to see. So that's been a great area to reach out. And then the other is I've been doing global calls with 100% of our Indium employee base that has terminals to join those calls twice a week. And I do one late at night at my local time for Asia, so early morning in Asia, and then one in the morning here that cover US and Europe mostly. And those have been really good to just keep everyone hearing the same message, everyone hearing what's going on, a lot of transparency and a lot of candor. And I think there's enough anxiety just normally right now in the world that to create any anxiety over what I'm thinking or what's going on in the business would be a disservice to the employee base. So I've been working really hard, as well as my communications team, to just keep all the communication fresh and keep everyone informed as much as possible.
Yeah, that communication's huge at the moment. That open communication. People are nervous. They're watching headlines. And actually, one of the things I find that is a big challenge for a lot of people is to kind of get away from it all. You're either because you're at home, you're either working from home, so you're constantly checking email and doing those things. And when you're not, you're checking the news, and the news is all about COVID-19. So to get away from it is difficult. What have you been doing in your kind of home life to avoid that? You can't go to restaurants, all those things are kind of shut off to you. What are you binging on Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever you watch?
Well, so I've been on Netflix, and on my wife and I have been watching the whole old House series. House is this medical doctor who solves the impossible cases, right? So we've been enjoying those. But I also have been reading a lot. So I've finished a few books, which has been fun to get back into reading.
Nice.
And then I'm a bit of a workout aholic. So I've been having fun running and bike. We got a new puppy last year, so she's old enough now to runs with me. So my dog Buttercup has been running with me, and that's been great. She's a golden retriever.
Oh, that's nice.
And then
that's great.
Swimming. There's no swimming right now. I can bike, I can run, I can play tennis with my son, but I can't swim right now, which is a little bit of a bummer.
Okay. No, it's curious, isn't it? It's curious to see how people's habits change, and I think there are some pieces of the lockdown that people have actually kind of gained from, maybe a little bit more family time. And both you and I know that we've over the last years we spent a lot of time on aeroplanes, and we haven't been doing so much of that. So that's time we got back. So that's been fascinating. Before we go, Ross, what advice would you offer to your peers? What would you say to other business leaders in the current situation and as we move forward?
I would just say, if you are currently in the midst of a hotspot or have been in one of the countries where you've had to work through this and recover, thank you for all you've done to protect your employees and keep your operations running. I think we do a good for our manufacturing is able to do a good for our communities and our countries by keeping jobs, keeping people employed, and keeping manufacturers running. And then I would say, if you haven't encountered that, you haven't had a kind of a bloom of COVID wherever you are, please ask for help. Reach out to me, reach out to other manufacturers that have had to deal with this. We're there to help. There are no secrets. Any one of us will share anything we can with you, all of our protocols, everything we're doing, because we want to keep everyone safe going forward, and we want our industry to be strong and our communities to be strong, and jobs are critical for that. So good luck out there. We wish you well. We hope you stay safe. And the electronics industry is still just a wonderful marketplace to be in. And I'm excited for the future. I think we have a bright future once we're through this, maybe this short-term dip or trough or whatever we're calling it. We'll have a bright future together.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Ross. And I think that ask for help, because people are willing to collaborate, and people have been through different parts of the experience and are happy to share. And I think that's hugely, hugely valuable. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your candor. Thank you for taking part. And to everybody that's been watching, we'll see you next time on EMS at Sea Level. Thank you.
Thank you.